Echoes of Wisdom has arrived on Switch after a surprisingly short wait. The game was only announced a few months ago, and for the most part, it's been a wonderful surprise. However, a significantly longer wait is also over because gamers finally get to play as Zelda in a Legend of Zelda game. Adventuring as Zelda immediately feels fun and natural after all these years, and I'm glad Nintendo finally went down this rewarding road. This new entry also returns to fairly traditional dungeons, all of which are inventive and enjoyable, as well as the same endearing aesthetic of Link's Awakening. Nintendo and Grezzo have created possibly the most beautiful and colorful of any top-down Zelda game, and it's a surprisingly large adventure with much to discover. However, during my initial playthrough of this game, there were two brand new design mechanics that in some ways started to wear on me several hours in, and by the time the credits rolled, those feelings persisted. So in this video, I want to discuss a couple gameplay issues that I think caused this game to only echo greatness instead of fully capturing it, and some simple alternatives that might have improved this situation. I do want to reiterate that for the most part, I really did enjoy this game. I think there's a ton of good stuff here. Go buy it and have fun. But this channel is about current and retro gaming analysis, so please subscribe and let's dive in. So both of my issues with this game are a result of the decision to give Zelda a magic staff instead of a more traditional sword or combat weapon. The staff enables the new Echo system, the main gameplay focal point, so we might as well start with the literal elephant in the room. In general, I actually enjoyed the Echo system. It's a unique mechanic that lets you instantly conjure world items such as rocks or jars or monsters after you've obtained their echo, usually by defeating or destroying them. You use these echoes to solve puzzles and traverse the world around you, and it creates many interesting gameplay scenarios. I appreciate the way Echoes breaks some of the design constraints of more traditional Zelda dungeons. The temples here all feel very creative and fresh. The Echo system has even led to comparisons between this game and the Fuse or Ultra Hand abilities in Tears of the Kingdom, with some going as far as to call this game top-down Tears of the Kingdom. However, I don't think that comparison feels accurate under scrutiny, and I think the Echo system has some issues in the implementation details. While Tears of the Kingdom's Ultra Hand and Zonai devices felt like creative tools for building and problem solving, Echoes, on the other hand, often end up just kind of feeling like stuff. Stuff isn't inherently bad, but too much stuff is often not a good thing. Put simply, I think there are way too many Echoes in this game. As you progress, Echoes begin to feel very similar to one another or not very useful. You could probably beat 80 or 90% of this game using only a couple dozen Echoes, especially if the system were streamlined, more on that in a moment, yet for some reason there are a whopping 127 echoes to find. I would gladly give up the 10% of gameplay scenarios that require a super specific echo in exchange for more manageable inventory menus and deeper interaction between fewer but richer echoes. Horizontally scrolling through and keeping track of your echoes becomes a major tedious headache once they reach critical mass. I was a little bit bummed to see that Nintendo hadn't learned from this exact same problem with the Fuse ability in Tears of the Kingdom. Now, you can sort echoes by most used or last used and so on, but if you sort by type, it provides obvious examples of what I'm talking about. Often, many echoes are somewhat or very interchangeable and could probably be combined or greatly streamlined. For example, do we need 4 animal statues? Do we need 3 types of pots? A regular bed and a soft bed? There are a ton of ground monsters, flying monsters, water monsters, and so on, but you usually end up just picking the most powerful one of each category, so why do we need so many? Do we need a sword moblin and a club moblin? I understand difficulty progression concerns, but do we need multiple power levels of the same monster echo, or couldn't it just replace or level up the original echo? For example, the regular bed could become a soft bed, or a Moblin level 2 could simply replace the weaker version. There's even 3 different types of spiders and 3 different types of rocks. Sure, one rock is for throwing, one is for floating on lava, and one is for heavying, but it seems like those could definitely be combined. Parts of Echoes of Wisdom become tedious when you feel like you're just scrolling through an endless list of echoes to try and pick the right one or even remember which ones you have. I'm still missing 30 echoes, but it's already out of control. I wish there were only a few dozen more capable echoes. Now, I assume the counter argument to this would be that having a huge variety of echoes allows for a huge variety of gameplay solutions, like we saw with Fuse and Ultra Hand in Tears of the Kingdom. While I think Echoes and the Fuse abilities are somewhat similar and share similar benefits and problems, use a random world object to solve a random world problem in exchange for major scrolling, I really don't think Echoes are comparable at all to Ultra Hand and Zonai devices, the real standout mechanic of Tears of the Kingdom. Even if you only end up frequently using a dozen of the Zonai objects in Tears of the Kingdom, all of them can be glued together and combined and interact with one another in all kinds of different ways, opening up crazy and interesting possibilities. This was almost an entire game in itself. While echoes can sort of be used in combination, such as creating a floating ice block to stack other objects on top of water, for the most part the interactions never really go beyond stacking things or some basic elemental dynamics. Tears of the Kingdom had a mind-boggling physics engine that you learned to push further and further and build increasingly cool things. I would much rather have seen fewer, more sophisticated echoes used in combination. The second, more minor issue I have with Echoes of Wisdom is the Sword Fighter mode. By pressing up on the D-pad, you sort of pseudo-turn into Link for a brief period, or at least adapt some of his likeness and gain access to some of his essential abilities, such as the sword and bow, and that allows you to attack directly instead of using an echo. You're also able to jump higher, which is very valuable in this traversal-heavy game. On the upper left of the screen, there's a might gauge that drains as long as you're in this mode. This mode is especially useful against the powerful main bosses, in tight combat situations against waves of enemies, or sometimes as an easy button to help you literally reach new heights. This sounds kind of cool conceptually, and sometimes it is, but in practice, I think Sword Fighter mode is kind of a strange mechanic that partially undermines other gameplay and thematic elements. For starters, I think it's odd that in Zelda's own game, when you essentially want to become more powerful, you have to sort of switch back into Link mode. This mostly bothers me because there's such an obvious alternative. Zelda literally has a magic staff, and it's a huge focal point of the game. Sword Fighter mode could have so easily been replaced with a classic Zelda magic gauge, or you could even just call it the wisdom gauge instead of the might gauge. And so instead of using might power to use the sword, you could just use up magic to gain access to some basic staff, melee, and ranged attacks, such as an energy slash or bolt attacks. This would keep Zelda as more of her usual self for the whole game, actually enhance the theme of her being more of a wise magic wielder, and better utilize the cool staff she holds, which is strangely and strictly reserved for the ecosystem. I also feel like the Sword Fighter form sort of doubles as a crutch that makes the game feel unsure of itself, since I found myself using Sword Fighter mode whenever the indirect combat using echoes was just too tedious or limiting. Early on, when echo power is low, this mode can also sort of feel like a cheat or easy button for certain puzzles instead of finding a solution that should work even without the Sword Fighter mode. On another level, it also feels like Nintendo couldn't fully let go of playable Link mechanics. I want to emphasize that I don't think Sword Fighter mode breaks the game or ruins the experience or anything like that. I just think it's a strangely implemented design element that feels kind of random or out of place. I hope we get another game where we play as Zelda, and I hope this is all handled a little bit differently there. And so again, I really want to iterate that I think Echoes of Wisdom is a good game. Pretty much everything I haven't talked about here is great stuff. I love the towns and villages and most of the story and gameplay scenarios. However, I just think the issues we discussed also make the experience feel a little bit clumsy or less polished than most Zelda games and prevent it from top-tier franchise status. But what about you? What did you think of the Sword Fighter and Echo systems? What did you think of the game as a whole? Leave a comment and let's discuss.